uh, got it. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dave Black. Retired in June of 21 from the Harrisburg Regional Chamber after a great 20-year run. Great organization, great boards. As you've heard some of us say, Pennsylvania is a fun place to do chamber work. I was telling some of the folks a little bit earlier that Mark Campbell and I had gotten together. Mark and I have known each other since a guy named Tom Ridge was a congressman, and Mark was on his staff. And one thing led to another, and we both ended up in Harrisburg, thanks to the good graces of Governor Ridge and Mark Holman, and we've stayed in touch. We're both from the great Northwest in Pennsylvania. Mark's from Warren County. I'm from Clarion originally. I don't know whether Tracy's on the call yet. I think she was going to try to get in from the Clarion Chamber. But so I was talking to Mark in anticipation of retirement, and he said, "Are you going to do anything?" And I said, best advice I had was wait and see whether anything finds you. And Mark gave me a call here a few months ago and said they were working on something called the American Promise. And it's an attempt to pass a constitutional amendment to really reverse Citizens United to a degree, or to change Citizens United, get dark money out of elections. And I don't know about anybody else, but there's been a lot of funky things happening in elections. I think the intent of granting permission for what's now known as dark money probably wasn't a bad idea at the time, but the way that the things turned out, and you'll hear from folks here in just a little bit, from Jeff, just a little bit about the impact of dark money in elections, and that it's non-accountable. So Mark asked me if I'd get involved a little bit, and I put together a list of Pennsylvania chamber execs who I thought might be interested, might have an interest in this. This is not a Republican issue. It's not a Democratic issue. It's, believe it or not, a good government issue, at least in my mind. So I want to thank Alan LaPolice and John for pulling this together. Thank Mark Campbell with the Ridge Policy Group. Always good to see you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Clements to run us through the program. There'll be a little Q&A afterwards, and we do value your time. So we promised 45 minutes, and we're going to keep it at 45 minutes unless the conversation goes on. Jeff, welcome, and you can give the folks a little background on yourself.
All right, Dave, thank you so much. We're so glad that we found you and you found us. We have been honored to be working with you on this great cause, and in Pennsylvania, which is still, as always in America, the Keystone State, with the opportunity to really help set things right. I do want to introduce some folks on the call, and I think it's small enough where we can just let each other know who's here. I see Kevin in Harrisburg. Give my best to Ryan. It was nice to see you guys when we were out there. I'm president of American Promise. I want to share a deck, which will go a little bit over the problem, but also about what's happening in Pennsylvania with the 2022 races, and there's enough of them that you're going to see what we have seen in other states around the country, including at least 6 or 7 Senate races in 2020. There were over $200 million on both sides, some much higher than that, and what it does to the state and to the people who live there, and why we think we got a pretty good solution that can also unite America and unite Pennsylvanians across all of our partisan divides with this solution. Before I do that, I want to just turn it right back to Mark, because we've been working with Mark and the team in Pennsylvania, who's just been wonderful, and see if you want to share a few words, Mark.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, and good to see all of you. Thank you for taking the time today. I know some of you, and for those I don't, I look forward to getting to know you. Just a quick personal note, because I know many of you know Governor Ridge. I've worked with Governor Ridge. We had the pleasure of being with Tom last Thursday up in Erie in February. I was happy to report that on the Thursday I was there, I think it was in the 50s, so take that. But more seriously, he's doing very well. As many of you know, continues to recover from a very serious stroke he had back in June, but he's working it hard, and he is doing very, very well. As Dave mentioned, I started doing this just after I got my driver's license, almost, with Tom, not quite, but coming out of college, and Dave had thick, luxurious dark hair at the time as well. And we're both still around, but I'm starting my 41st year with Tom. I go back to the very, very first campaign when he ran for Congress, and have been with him all along the way, serving as chief of staff in both his congressional office and his gubernatorial office. Obviously, it's been, after 40 years, it's been a pleasure, to say the least. I talked to Tom a little bit last Thursday when I was with him, and I told him what we were doing and where the project stood, and that we'd be having this conversation this week. And as some of you may know, he is a strong supporter of the effort that is being made both in Pennsylvania and across the country. The truth of the matter is that dark money has ruined politics and governing as we knew it when I first started doing this with Tom back in 1982, to a large extent. It has, I think, come to the point where its presence in our political process has made it virtually impossible for guys like Tom Ridge and Jim Gerlach and other good public servants to serve, given the influence that dark money has, unaccountable as it is, unlimited as it is. And I think we finally have reached the point where something simply has to be done. And for, all of us but Dave, who are in Pennsylvania, or most of us, all we need to do is turn on our TVs every night to see, particularly in the US Senate race, the back and forth between Dr. Oz and Dave McCormick, not between them, but between outside organizations who have raised bucket loads of money and are smashing the other candidate repeatedly, night after night, multiple times. And we're just at the beginning of this. We still have 2.5 months to go in this campaign. And you're going to see the same thing happen in the gubernatorial races. And it has rendered campaigns and politics, at least the way I understood them and knew them, meaningless. And we've simply have reached the point where something has to be done. And was very proud that Governor Ridge so enthusiastically agreed to join the effort. Governor Schweiker as well, who I had the pleasure of working with Governor Schweiker as well for a period of time. It's time to do something. And so I'm looking forward to today's conversation and looking forward to working with all of you in the weeks and months to come. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to Governor Ridge. We're really glad to hear his continued recovery. So much appreciate the support from all of you. And again, I will take the deck, but I just want to quickly introduce, I see some of our business leaders and other leaders from around the country. A few have joined us here, and we'll be happy to be resources for your folks in Pennsylvania as you get this effort going. I see Marie Hanselde-Kimmel in New Jersey, and Judy Nagel and Howard Hauser in Green Bay, and Laura Nittmeyer in California. Yeah, and they've all done really great business events, like Dave, are volunteers, and it's sort of really the backbone of American Promise, which I'll say more about in a second. I also thank Alan Jennings. Good to see you, Alan, in the Lehigh Valley, for his efforts and support. Does anybody else want to just quickly introduce themselves and where they're from or their business background, business affiliation? Just open mic for a second or two. I think many of you know each other. But... Okay.
Or I'm Alex Halper with the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Thanks for being here. And Kevin and Congressman, we talked with you. Thank you for being here, both of you. Alan, we mentioned Tony or Allison. Would you like to introduce yourself, where you're from?
I'm Allison Koch. I'm also with the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry.
Great. Thank you for joining us, Allison.
I'm Jose Antonio Ortiz from the Lehigh Valley, originally from Mexico City, and I know, believe me, I know all about politicians trying to steal because that's all we have in Mexico. I don't like the idea of repeating that here.
Nor do we. Thank you for joining us, sir. Okay, anybody else before we get going? All right, it's gonna be a conversation, so I'm gonna move through the deck pretty fast, but just to kind of give us an orientation, and then we'd love to open it up to your thoughts, ideas, questions, suggestions. So we'd love to have your support in this effort, of course, and your sort of leadership in helping to carry this through. So if it doesn't go awry, I will share my screen and get going right now. Okay, you should see a deck starting with the For Our Freedom Amendment. Does everyone see that? Great. Okay, so it's really simple what we're trying to do, which is sort of repair the constitutional foundation that has gone wrong. It strengthens free speech, it strengthens representation, free and fair elections, election integrity, the connection of our American people with our government. And it does it very simply. It enables Congress and the states to enact effective regulation of money in their respective jurisdictions in elections. What Pennsylvania decides to do with that will be up to Pennsylvania, but we think it would be much better than what is currently the required sort of Wild West, where anyone can spend anything. So it's a simple but powerful, transformative solution. The money, I'll go quickly over some of the stats, but it's basically going exponentially, doubling since 2016. It will probably double again by 2024, and so on. And most of it is coming from very concentrated few sources. For founders who are concerned about concentrated power, we have a real concentration problem and an unaccountability problem. I'll say more about that. I want to emphasize how cross-partisan this effort is. You'll see in a minute, overwhelming supermajorities of Americans support it, and leaders are stepping up. We're really grateful. President Carter the other day endorsed this cause, and joined by former Senator Olympia Snowe, Republican from Maine. She's on our advisory council, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, our Common Purpose Commission, Partnership for American Democracy, which is supported by Walmart Foundation and all the former presidential centers. So this is something that is really for real right now. This is our national strategy. It is about exactly what we're doing here. This won't be done by anybody else. It'll be done by all of us. And this is something of an invitation we're offering to folks in the states to take lead and help make it happen. We would love to see the gold star on Pennsylvania by the end of the year, as Pennsylvania could become the 23rd state to formally get behind this effort. And that will empower, frankly, your members of Congress, no matter which party they're from, to do what their voters really want them to do, which is to get this moving and get some big reform around how money is operating in our political system. Business is key. Business leadership everywhere makes a huge difference. For a lot of reasons that you know well. It's practical. It's what we do every day, is solve problems and negotiate without just screaming and throwing things. We have to work together. Business people get that. And I think business people are also at the receiving end of a pay-to-play corruption problem, rather than sort of the perpetrators of it. Many of our business supporters say, believe me, it's not bribery, it's more like extortion, as they feel unbelievable pressures to give money or spend money, even the biggest corporations, as their business model could come under threat because somebody else is spending money to rewrite the rules. And that's a systemic problem. No one business can solve that. It needs a level playing field solution like we offer. Maureen Klein is the VP of Public Affairs and Sustainability at Pirelli Tire, North America, and based in Georgia, first sort of public company to sign on to this effort. And we expect more. Many business leaders around the country now signing up. John McCree is on the call, as Dave mentioned. He's our manager of our National Business Network and manages this network. In Pennsylvania, I'm sorry, the screen is distorting these handsome pictures, but This is our sort of landing, launch and beginning. So you are in on the ground floor and can help us build this out, but it's already attracted support from across the state and across the political spectrum in Pennsylvania. So I touched on the economic issues around this. I know chamber folks, of course, rightly so. That's the sort of top of the agenda. There is a real connection that our business people are finding between this problem and business and economic development, whether it's small business feeling and actually being priced out, diversion and wasteful resources to politics, to being forced to answer every issue in society, as many of the big companies are now being called upon to do. Being seen as political agents rather than economic activity is not a plus for most of our business folks. And the threat to innovation, as we become, as Jose Antonio said, more like some other countries that are further down this path, where you lose innovation when you have a systemic corruption problem. And that's the risk that we face if we don't do this. So there we go. We have a few Rotarians on the call, and we have a very sort of intersection with business and Rotarians and other civic groups, which likewise get the problem, get the solution, and are problem-solving leaders. And so we're very grateful for the sort of program we have with Rotary. We think it's potentially replicable, and would be interested in your feedback in chambers and other places where we could really bring this conversation in a calm, nonpartisan way that can have really big impact. So we can share more on that. This is about a problem, but it's also about a vision. You know, we really think Americans are capable of big solutions, and moving forward for better days. I think the better days, you know, look something like this, where we take kind of the vicious circle of dark money politics that's sort of tearing us apart, and turn it into a virtuous circle. With it's not that one solution can solve everything, but that we can begin rebuilding trust. We can begin rebuilding sort of a connection, as I said, between voters and the government. We can begin rebuilding business focused on business, not politics. Just a much better system. Sorry, I'm just going to move. There we go. So let me just give you a bit of the data again. I said it's expanding. We don't focus on where it's coming. We don't point fingers. It is a systemic problem. So it's the wealthy donors, yes. Super PACs, yes. Corporations, yes. Unions, yes. And foreign governments now. Serious loopholes and concerns about foreign influence in our election, state and federal. I can say more about that, but this slide is one I always want to share. I mentioned the Senate races. You're facing this in 2022 in Pennsylvania. Mark alluded to the change. I think sometimes we don't realize how rapid and dangerously destabilizing the change is. The pink line, which you can barely see, were the most expensive races in the Senate in 2010. The most. And at the time, people thought that was outrageous and a real problem. You can barely see it now when measured against the most expensive 2020 races. The exponential scale of what's happening is reflected in this graph. That's the Georgia, the 2 Senate elections, 4 more. I'll say something about Maine, which didn't even make the top 5, as they saw a $200 million race in the Senate, Senator Collins' reelection. It's both sides. Again, we're cross-partisan on the solution. We're cross-partisan on just being honest about where it comes from. We talk about dark money. This is what it looks like. It's now institutionalized. Both parties, the Democrats now almost double the Republicans in the dark money side. For a while, it was the Republicans who were ahead of the Democrats. This will go back and forth. So this isn't a blame game. This is the problem, that both sides, neither is going to disarm until we help them do so. These groups are various quote unquote nonprofits that can run money into the elections because we have essentially broken the guardrails. So you might be able to see that One Nation or the 1630 Fund is spending lots and lots of money in the hundreds of millions. What you can't see is where they get the money. And that's one of the dangerous sort of conditions of our situation. I mentioned Maine. This is David Trahan, former Republican state senator, runs a logging business in Maine, executive director of the Maine Sportsmen's Alliance, the Second Amendment hunting and fishing group in Maine. He described the experience in 2020 as being 20 feet under snow in an avalanche where no one could hear us. And he has influence. The Sportsmen's Alliance is one of the most significant Republican groups in Maine, and he could not get airtime. His group could not be heard. So what does that say about the average voter? He's now joined our effort and is on our advisory council. So as I said, Pennsylvania, it's coming. It's already started. You know that. I talk about the disconnection with voters and our government and some of the destabilizing impacts of that. Again, look at the data. What's happened in the last 10 years, basically a collapse in trust of Americans in our government. This is a regular poll that the Pew Research Center does, a survey, a study. And in the past decade, it's just dramatically, the bottom has fallen out, where virtually nobody believes government's run for the benefit of Americans. And almost everybody believes it's run for a few big interests. Now, whether that's true every day or not, the perception causes serious damage. And when Americans hear, well, there's nothing we can do about it, it's just free speech, it only adds to the sense of hopelessness. So we think we can bring those curves closer together, and part of our work, part of our effort, part of the result will be to, again, do what a democracy has to do, which is that people believe in it, that it has integrity. So who supports it? Just about everybody. 2018, not much gap between any of the different voting blocks for this constitutional amendment. We call it the 4-Hour Freedom Amendment. Business people, even higher than the average voter in terms of looking for a constitutional solution and basic level playing field approach to campaign money. This is a Pennsylvania poll. It's a year or so ago, but we don't think it has changed. Again, across the board support. This is citizen data we work with, a non-partisan survey and polling firm. And what's interesting is not only like everywhere else, the support crossing all lines, but they were heard the arguments in favor. It went up to 82%. They heard the arguments against it. It only dropped down to 76%. So we think, and we've seen this kind of sustained support, and think this is not a controversial issue for Chambers or anyone else who is interested in getting involved, that this will not burn anybody as a partisan issue. It's a very, again, unifying thing we can do at a time we need it. So I'll sum up. What we can do is a permanent reform. It's foundational, it's constitutional. We're not doing anything new. Americans always reach for this lever when things are really going bad. And 8 of our 27 amendments have actually corrected Supreme Court decisions. In this case, not just Citizens United, the most famous, but a whole series of cases that kind of created the notion that any money from anywhere, no matter how much, is free speech and can't be regulated, is what this would correct. It has the unity and consensus of the country. Federalism, it lets Pennsylvania solve the problem in Pennsylvania, and civic trust, which I've alluded to a few times. So thank you for your interest, your ideas, your introductions to others who might want to have this conversation. And we hope you will get behind this with us. And I will stop there and turn it back to Dave to help us talk further about this. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks for the quick run through. I'll just add, the reason I got involved in this particular issue. Alan and I exchanged a little. Alan, La Police, and I exchanged a little bio, and I talked about civility in government, and I believe when you have all this extra money in here, it makes it harder to become civil. And harkening back to Mark Campbell's comments back in the Ridge days, we talked to people on both sides of the aisle, and you had to get things done. And this money serves as a wedge. And I don't fault the Supreme Court for their interpretation, but our Constitution is designed in such a way when you need to correct something by the courts, you do a constitutional amendment. That's kind of simple problems of democracy, but that's where we are on this. And from a chamber perspective, if you want to learn more, contact John or myself or Mark or Jeff, and be happy to provide you some more information. Some more information, but we'd also like to, have the opportunity to maybe discuss it if you have a government relations committee, talk about it with them. Again, this is not a partisan issue. It's something a little bit different. You're not taking a position on a bill or anything, but it is a grassroots initiative. And quite frankly, I think you might be surprised with the support from the business community. They're getting hit for these dollars, and a lot of times it's tough for a business, for whatever reason, to say no when somebody asks them for money like this. They might appreciate an amendment that says no, you can't do that. So I think there's a lot of positives from the business community, but the equity, the fairness back into campaigns, I think speaks to a lot. So let's open up the floor here for any questions you might have for Alan or any of us.
Dave, what does the amendment do? Jeff, what is the specific language of the amendment you're seeking to be adopted? And because are you taking on the problem of money itself in politics, which I'm not sure is the right mission to have, because campaigns need to have money to communicate their message to voters. The question is it something that voters can understand and know what money's coming into a campaign where they reside, know who the donors are, know what the sources are? So are you after the money generally, or are you after simply more transparency as to where the dollars are coming from? And in the case of dark money, you don't necessarily have reporting of who the sources are for certain PACs that are doing independent expenditures and campaigns. So do you have specific language for a constitutional amendment? And if so, can we understand what that language is?
Sure. Great question, Congressman. Thank you. Let me share the language that we're looking at. And I'll preface this, again, I'll share a screen. I'll preface this by saying there's 13 or so, 14 different versions of this amendment that have been introduced in Congress. This one intentionally has not. This is one that we are trying to develop in a multi-year process of engagement with Americans. And we've been doing town halls all over the country. We've gotten expert input. We've gotten feedback. And this is off our website where we actually have a survey. So this is an ongoing process, but we have members across the aisle that we're talking with in Congress about introducing something like this. It's not that different than what's already been introduced and has a lot of support. On the Democratic side, we would like a sort of flag to rally to. On the Republican side, this one has a little bit more of that input from Republicans around federalism. A lot of our Republican members and team are very concerned about the nationalization of every election that the money's doing. And that, to your point and your question, disclosure alone won't solve that. I think many Americans already know that most of the money is coming from recognizable names at this point, from George Soros to Tom Steyer, the Kochs or someone else on the other side. And they're just, that doesn't help the under the avalanche problem. What we're trying to do, though, is sort of reset the constitutional foundation so that we can decide the best approach. Pennsylvania may decide, you know what, we are about disclosure and transparency, not about limits, and that would be allowed under this Constitution. Other states might replace the limits that had stood for 100 years that the court struck down. So examples, Montana and something like 25 states had limits on union and corporate money in elections. And frankly, unions and corporations were both sort of relieved at that because they could say, well, we can't, and they knew their competitors weren't. And those were struck down. I suspect several states would choose to enact those kind of laws again. I think virtually every state would probably go after foreign government influence, including through different vehicles, whether it's an LLC or something else that needs to be updated. So this language is trying to get at, like most good constitutional law, what are the authorities of the states and Congress? What are the checks and balances? What are the protection of rights without dictating a solution? Now, I have my views, no doubt you have yours, is what the right one is. but none of them are going to be able to prevail if we can't get the constitutional foundation set right.
So basically, if I'm reading this correctly, you're allowing Congress and at the state level, state legislatures to basically just reset their election laws, campaign financing laws based on how they want to, and they can decide both for individuals, natural persons as stated here, or artificial entities, which I assume includes PACs or corporations perhaps. You're allowing them a reset so they can go back without any constraints under Citizens United to reset their election campaign finance laws based on how they believe would be a fair way to allow for the financing campaigns and basically allow for a total reset if they want to at the congressional or at the state level.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And we think that there's, of course, the First Amendment is, we think, strengthened by this, not weakened, and the Supreme Court doesn't disappear in this area. There's just a lot more leeway for the states and Congress. And that's what Section 1 is intended to do. It gives the court, Congress, and the states guidance. You can't just make limits, for one side or another, or just do willy-nilly that aren't actually connected to the issues that are actually impacted by the lack of regulation. So Section 1 is intended to give long-term, multi-generational guidance to the courts and the legislatures, state and federal. But basically, you summed it up very well, Congressman.
Thank you.
Can I contribute something real fast in that as well? I'm Alan Lovelace. I'm Deputy Political Director here at American Promise, and I'm a big fan of the 10th Amendment. And I like to frame it like this. The 10th Amendment very clearly says that the federal government has its boundaries, and those things that aren't in the Constitution, they should be returned to the states or to the people at large. And nowhere in the Constitution do I read that the Supreme Court gets to determine who can contribute or how a state can regulate or how a state can ask for transparency or what terms or what security measures a state or a municipality takes to ensure the security of their elections. So when SCOTUS goes and they get involved in the election process and they say, you can't ask for transparency, you can't set what you consider reasonable limits, you can't say only voters can contribute, you can't do any of those things. Well, in my interpretation, the Constitution doesn't say that they can do that. So the 10th Amendment says, no, throw it back to the states. So with the amendment as we propose to put it forward, it does restore to the states or to the federal legislature, depending on the boundaries, the right to set limits or not set limits based on what they determine to be appropriate. The amendment also is not prescriptive. In no way does anyone in American Promise or any of the language of the amendment say you have to do something and here's how you have to do it. It is non-prescriptive in any way. It simply restores to the state legislatures and to the people the right to govern over and manage their election processes.
Just a quick, quick question. Jeff, in your mind, what would support from a chamber, like a regional one, like the Harrisburg Regional Chamber, what would that support look like? Would it be a position statement or a letter to someone in particular? Would it be a social media campaign? What are you thinking there?
Kevin, I'm glad you asked. So I think, of course, that's up to you. But I think first, this is an educational and engagement effort, as I always say. We're not doing this ourselves, and we're not asking for money or any other way of like, okay, you guys go do that, get back to us when it's done. It's really about connecting up Americans, in this case Pennsylvanians, around, okay, this sounds good, how do I help? And so I think where the chamber could help a lot, both the local, regional, and statewide, is bringing this to the attention of your members, whether that's in a newsletter or other form of communication that you do. And it can be in an educational way. It doesn't have to be a position necessarily if you don't choose to. It can be have us at a policy breakfast or a small gathering like this with some of your members and just let us expand the conversation. Obviously, we would welcome, we endorse the For Our Freedom Pennsylvania campaign. That would be wonderful. But, we're letting people get there when they're ready to get there. We do expect a legislative resolution to be introduced, and that would be sort of the outcome of that, what we'd want. And even that resolution doesn't, we went through some language that we recommend and like, but we're not going to dictate that either. And the Pennsylvania campaign doesn't have to say, it has to say this or that. The resolution basically says kind of the summary that the congressman just said about what the amendment will do. So supporting that legislation when that comes forward would be wonderful. So many different ways, Kevin. So and would be happy to sort of have follow-up conversations with anyone who's interested in that support. But really helping to spread the word on this first and help us connect and then sign on to say this would be a good thing for Pennsylvania, a good thing for business. That would be
yeah, absolutely. I'll be happy to shoot you an email once we're offline here about continuing the conversation with some of our people. Sort of a follow-up question that you alluded to with the resolution. Is there a timeline that you guys are looking at, an anticipated submission date for that resolution?
Yeah,
or
I'm
anything
going
like
to
that?
kick that right back to Harrisburg and Mark Campbell, who is knows the legislature much better than I do. So
we have been talking to several members about introducing the resolution, and I can convey to you that there is interest, and we believe that once they return from appropriations hearings here in the next month or so, that we would have a resolution introduced in both chambers shortly thereafter. So certainly this spring, in advance of budget discussions in May and June.
Okay, great. Thank you.
thank you, Kevin. Look forward to working with you. Other questions or comments?
Yeah, Jeff, if I can just add in on Kevin's comment as well. If you really get comfortable with it, maybe coordinating with Mark a little bit and maybe putting a bug in the ear of one of your regional reps in Harrisburg. Cheryl Delosier comes to mind as somebody that's kind of a policy wonk, that would appreciate something like this. Patty Kim on the Democratic side, there's if you feel comfortable doing it, I think that would be kind of the extension, and with in coordination with Mark and his efforts.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
David, you don't look like you're from Scranton anymore.
Dave, I think you're muted. If you're trying to defend yourself from the palm trees, you better.
Yeah. Alan, you missed that. I stayed in Harrisburg after the Ridge administration, so I was from Harrisburg and from Western PA. But now I'm in Florida, and the sun is just starting to hit me right here.
It's good to see you. I haven't seen you in years, David. Haven't seen you in years. It's good to see you. I think one of the things that's most concerning people these days is the division. And I think with the current money arrangement, we don't get a Jim Gerlach or a Tom Ridge or a Charlie Dent anymore. We get these extremes on each side. I think somehow we've got to communicate that as simply as we can. Republicans are so much better at the message than Democrats are. But somehow we've got to say that this is the kind of thing that we need to do in order to restore any kind of sense of civility in our political process, and like I said, I think Republicans are better at the wordsmithing than Democrats are, but somehow we've got to get that across. The other thing is we also got to get Republicans to know that this can restrict the unions and stuff like that, because we don't want to just restrict business. That's gonna end up costing us Republican support for this thing.
Yeah. And as I said, Alan, thank you, and thanks for your support in Lehigh Valley and around the state. And I think it's absolutely true. We emphasize always unions, corporations, wealthy. We don't blame one or the other. And
Barbara Streisand.
Barbara Streisand. Exactly. Yeah, Alex, hi.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't be associated with anything anti Barbara Streisand or my mother. Mom won't forgive me. I am along those same lines, though. I am wondering if you can give some insight to your experience in other states where this has come up, or nationally. What has the opposition looked like? Has the opposition been as bipartisan and eclectic as the support has been? But who has emerged as sort of the main players and the primary forces on the other side of this discussion?
Yeah, Alex, it's a great question, and it's now been about a decade since the problem really accelerated, as some of the slides I showed indicated. at the beginning, I think partly because it was a Supreme Court decision that, was the conservative majority supported, and that, Leader McConnell in the Senate supported that outcome. And there was a very strong reaction from Democrats at the time, President Obama and on down. It led to a sort of partisan divide in Washington and Congress on this issue. So the Democrats, the Republicans were kind of ready for the decision and got the jump in the 2010 election and maybe 2012 as well on the money. The Democrats have since caught up, but the perception that Democrats are for quote unquote overturning Citizens United, something we don't actually spend a lot of time saying because it's not actually helpful or constructive message, but it became seen by some as a partisan thing and sort of free speech. On the other side, of course, we think we're all about free speech. We're trying to strengthen free speech, but that became, so there was a bit of that. And mostly, to be honest, in the country, it's never changed. Our polling ballot initiatives, there's a ballot initiative on this in Montana in 2012. Obama lost to Mitt Romney by 12 points. The ballot initiative supporting this constitutional amendment passed 75%, 25%. So in the country, it's always been sort of cross-partisan. But the biggest sort of talking point against it for a while was, oh, that's a Democratic attack on free speech or something like that. And it's why American Promise was born. So we launched in January 2016 to actually be a place where Americans could trusted platform. This is the only thing we do. There's no other agenda. And that was the first time, because before it was sort of a partisan lineup of kind of progressive groups pushing campaign finance reform, quote unquote, and Cato and some of the conservative groups supporting the decision. So that's now changed, but that's been the biggest opposition. When we've had votes and people get to vote on it, it's actually, regularly supermajority support for doing this. It's only kind of, Alan alluded to this, it's only if, frankly, the progressives blow it by messaging with sort of blame game and somehow
terrible.
Democrats are virtuous on this and Republicans are evil. Does it actually go backwards? But if we can just have the conversation, we're just fine. So I think the opposition now is, we got a multi-billion-dollar industry that didn't exist 3 cycles ago, and of operatives and media and other entities that have now got literally billions of dollars flowing through them. I don't know how they're going to react to a change in the business model that we might offer. Where you can't do dark money, attack disinformation campaigns that pit Americans against each other. So I don't quite know where that one's going to go. I don't know of any opposition in Pennsylvania. I think the main challenge, though, is the sort of updating of the perception that what we're doing is nonpartisan and constructive for everybody. That's the biggest hurdle. I think some of there's 75-25 still means a lot of people aren't with us. 25% of 300 million is a lot, right? So I don't want to pretend this is like a layup and nobody's against it. There will be some who are philosophically of the view that any government regulation in the money and politics space is, quote unquote censorship or a free speech violation. So we won't ever convince everybody. But including the ACLU is sort of quietly takes that position because none of their members like that position, but they so far have been of the view that this is not a problem that needs a constitutional amendment. I hope they change, but the ACLU often is out there on a kind of an extreme edge, and that's how we see this. Is it's an extreme position in our view that the states can't do anything about this, or that we just have to let all this money run roughshod over us. So I think partly I'm not answering your question precisely because we haven't yet gotten to the point where, I think they're going to be worried that we should have to get 2/3 of Congress. It needs to be ratified in 38 states. So there's plenty of, work ahead to see who's actually going to come out swinging against this. But our strategy, and that's why I shared that, quite frankly, is spread this among so many Americans, and we will get this done, just like all the other amendments that are really hard, but we'll get it done, rather than sort of concentrate our forces in one behemoth organization and have it be a big money fight to get big money out. We don't really see that as the option. So,
but Jeff, to be clear, the amendment itself does not outlaw dark money. The amendment
correct.
itself simply gives the opportunity for Congress and state legislatures to outlaw dark money. So even if the amendment passes, that just sets up the whole second half of the game in terms of, particular legislative proposals moving through the process, and of course the fights that'll happen, in each of the capitals, to get those proper regulations in place. And there's no promise that, a decent bill would pass in all the state capitals and in Washington. But what the amendment does is at least give you a fighting chance then to have that discussion in the halls of the legislatures as well as Congress to get the best legislation passed as possible. So is that the better way to maybe articulate it?
That's why you were in Congress and I wasn't. That's a very good way.
No, that's
that's exactly
get my head around exactly.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah,
what the game plan is here. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And you can see it as a vice, not a virtue. That it doesn't. Why all this work for something that doesn't do anything, quote unquote. But we actually think you just put the exact strategy right, which is let's get the foundation right. Let's unify America around the principles that we want, and then there'll be plenty. The second half, as you put it, we'll be in a stronger position to get things right after that.
Yeah, thank you.
New Jersey had a transparency law shot down. It was passed in 2018, and the suit against it was brought by ACLU and Americans for Prosperity, and it was felt to be unconstitutional based on the Citizens United. But it really had some limits, and it also was transparency, a combination of both.
Thanks, Marie.
And that's why it takes an amendment. But strange bedfellows, ACLU and American Prosperity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Laura has a comment down there, or Jeff.
Hi, Laura. And then I see Mr. Ortiz too.
Having trouble there on meeting. Sorry. I was actually wanted to just come back to the request that Alex made and a comment that Congressman Gerlach made about the opposition and experience in different states. I'm the coordinator in California right now, where I'm retired. But before 2018, I was 32 years a pharmaceutical executive in New Jersey. And the most recent writing that I've done is about the gubernatorial elections in both New Jersey and recall in California, which are strange parallels because both of those cases could have very well been funded by money outside the state. And that really ignites interest in a lot of voters. I think the biggest opposition that we have is actually people in government as well as voters don't really understand how far this movement has come. If half the states before 2010 had election laws that placed reasonable limits already in place, these are not things that are going to be rediscovered anew, right, in the state houses across the country. The minute that the amendment is passed, Alaska will immediately go back to a case where if you want to spend money in their elections, you have to be a resident of Alaska. And I think that would be refreshing, for reassuring for a lot of Americans that we once had this kind of reasonable statement. And it's taken this long to get there, to get back to the place we were with our democracy such a short time ago. And this is exactly the kind of conversation that I have with my Republican members of Congress now in California. We have several who are very interested in this issue. And in the beginning, let's say in 2010, they saw themselves as supporters of Citizens United. This is a case, though, just like every other amendment question in our history, where after the Supreme Court makes a decision, it takes about 10 years for the general population, for there to be an observation that things have really not gone as intended, right? What may have seemed like even a good idea at the time, for those who didn't foresee this as a tragedy, now they're really, paying attention because things are not going the way that they expected. And once you have a conversation allowing people who are knowledgeable about constitutional amendments to see, hey, this is exactly the way the other 8 or 9 amendments that overturned Supreme Court decisions were made, it takes a good 10 years and perhaps a little bit longer to get to the point where there's significant support in the country to set things right. And so here we are now already in a position of having 22 states have recognized this as important. And I think the people of Pennsylvania recognize this as an issue. Personally, I miss Charlie Dent very much. He was such a great guy, even from my seat as a pharmaceutical person. So it's lovely to see you. And I hope we get to have this conversation again from small business perspective at Rotary level, right up to the biggest corporations in the country.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah. And Laura, as a state, Wisconsin, we have not yet passed any kind of resolution, but we have 167 communities, whether they be towns, villages, cities, or counties, that have already passed a resolution with overwhelming majorities that they want campaign finance reform.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Judy. Mr. Ortiz.
I would like to, well, number one, Mr. Ortiz, well, that was my dad. And I know we have sometimes trouble with my name. My first name is Jose Antonio. My friend Alan Jennings understood this from 30 some years ago when I met him. He's probably the only one who calls me, and John McCrea also calls me Jose Antonio, which I appreciate. I hear, especially what Alan mentioned about the communication aspect. We know for sure that the one side is very bad, has great ideas, but extremely lacking the knowledge or the desire to communicate effectively. The other side is very well communicator. It's a very effective communicator. Now, this idea that you are presenting is needed. How are we going to start not only doing with the business leaders, how are we communicating with the regular people? We already know this Citizens United is horrible, it's horrendous. Took 10 years to realize how bad it is. How can we convince people that what you are proposing this time is the right path? What means are you using or hope to use?
Jose Antonio, thank you. So I think this is a big part of it, honestly, that we start with these kind of conversations in networks. Business people want to hear it from other business people, trusted people. Politics is so divisive right now. There's a lot of distrust about even the most effective communications. If it's sort of some big organization doing some big digital thing. Whereas if you're going to your Rotary, going to your chamber meeting, going to your sort of in your communities, having these conversations, we think is incredibly powerful. And we've seen that over and over, and our folks in Green Bay can share their experience. Front page of the Green Bay paper after their event there at the Downtown Green Bay Business Association and Rotary, and really effective communication. And business is just one network. We're talking to sportsmen in Pennsylvania. We're talking to college and university students. We're talking to people in different parts of the state. There were communications in Philadelphia aren't going to be the same as communications in Pittsburgh, as you all know better than I do. So we think it's really important that it be authentic and that people hear it from fellow Pennsylvanians as much as possible. That's the key. I think nationally, what we try to do on communications is, Alex, thank you. We see you have to go. Really appreciate you being with us. Look forward to talking again.
Thank you.
We think it's really important that we communicate well one big thing, because we know most Americans are with us, and what we have to do is be honest and authentic, that this is for real, that we can do it, and that they have a role to play. And because I think not only is this distrust, there's a sense of hopelessness, and what we're offering is one of the hardest things Americans do to fix the country. And that means we got to believe that we can achieve this. So that's a big part of the communication as well. I know we're at time and people have appointments, so I want to stop there and just, Dave, do you want to wrap us up, or if there's any other quick questions? And I'm going to put, we'll follow up, actually. We have the recording. We'll send the recording out. You'll have our contact information. I'm happy to talk one-on-one or get a group together, work with Dave and Mark and others to, and all of you to continue the conversation. But Dave?
Jeff, would you also be able to email around that slide deck?
Yes, happily. Oh, there you are, Kevin. I was wondering who was saying that. Yes,
Great, thank you.
We'll include the deck in the follow-up as well.
Thank you.
Good. Any other follow-up questions or anything? I want to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy schedules to join this today and to learn a little bit more about American Promise. Just Google it, AmericanPromise.com, and take a look. There's a lot of information on the website, and Alan and the team have really done a nice job putting a lot of information up there. One of the final thing, I'll just on a personal note, I'll share, as I was looking down through the advisory board on this, as soon as I came to Doris Goodwin Kearns, or Doris Kearns Goodwin, I said, okay, I'm in. And just by happenstance, I was in a bookstore here in Sanibel, a really nice bookstore, and I picked up a book that she wrote called The Bully Pulpit, and it's the discussion of Theodore Roosevelt and the media of the day, the muckrakers, so to speak. Anna Tarbell, I think, Mark Allegheny grad.
Ida Tarbell.
Ida, and William Howard Taft, and it's just a confluence of things, and it's a time, and I kind of see this as a similar time in our American history, and if we don't learn from history, we're not doing things right. So Jeff, thank you so much for presenting this. Mark, thank you for bringing this to my personal attention, and everybody else, once again, thank you for joining us. Jeff, Mark, any final words?
No, Dave, thank you so much. And thanks to everybody. We'll look forward to being in touch and continuing the work. Mark?
Thank you to everyone. Look forward to working with you. Thank you.
All right. See you soon, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.